The cold doesn't just chill you, it hunts you. It seeks out the gaps in your clothes, the cracks in your skin, and the rhythm of your heartbeat, waiting for the moment you grow too tired to keep it out. I used to think of winter as a season. Out here, in the vast, white void of the Siberian tundra, winter is a god. And right now, I am trapped in its throat. My name is Julian. I am, or was, an engineer for the Trans-Northern Line. They told us the Aurora Express was a marvel of modern engineering, a self-sustaining ecosystem on tracks, designed to pierce through the most brutal storms on the planet. But even the greatest machines are just toys when the Earth decides to breathe. The derailment happened at 3:14 a.m. I remember the sound most of all. It wasn't a crash. It was a groan of tortured metal that sounded like a dying leviathan. The train didn't just stop. It was swallowed. A massive shelf of ice and permafrost had shifted, sending the lead locomotive and the first 3 cars plunging into a jagged ravine, while the rest of us, the passenger sleepers, were left canted at a 45-degree angle, half buried in a mountain of snow. I woke up hanging from my safety harness, the world upside down. The silence that followed the crash was heavier than the snow outside. No screaming, no alarms, just the ticking of cooling metal and the hiss of a broken steam pipe somewhere in the walls. Is anyone there? I whispered. My voice felt brittle, like it might shatter. Over here, a muffled voice replied from across the darkened cabin. I unbuckled, falling hard against the luggage rack. My vision blurred as I fumbled for my tactical flashlight. When the beam cut through the dark, it landed on a woman clutching the edge of a bolted table. Her name was Mara, a doctor I'd shared a brief, polite nod with in the dining car hours earlier. Her face was pale, a streak of dark blood running from her hairline down to her chin. Are you hurt? I asked, my breath blooming in a thick cloud before me. Just a cut, she said, her voice shaking. But Julian, look at the windows. I turned the light toward the thick, reinforced glass. It wasn't dark outside. It was white, solid, packed ice pressed against the panes with such force that the glass was beginning to spiderweb with tiny, crystalline fractures. We weren't just derailed, we were entombed. We have to get to the back of the car, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The heating units are in the floor panels. If the auxiliary power hasn't kicked in, we have about 2 hours before the ambient temperature hits 40 below. As we crawled toward the rear door, we found the others. There was Cale, a young, frantic student who was hyperventilating, and Arthur, an older man with the weathered hands of a laborer who seemed eerily calm. Out of the 300 people who had boarded the Aurora Express, we were the only ones in Car 07 who were still breathing. The doors won't budge, Arthur grunted, bracing his shoulder against the heavy sliding portal to Car 08. The frame is warped. We're sealed in. Listen, Mara said suddenly, holding up a hand. We went still. At first, there was nothing but the wind howling like a banshee outside the buried steel. But then, a sound came from beneath our feet. Clang, clang, clang. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Something was hitting the exterior hull of the train. Rescuers, Cale asked, a spark of hope in his eyes. I pressed my ear against the freezing metal wall. The sound wasn't coming from above, where a rescue team would be digging. It was coming from below, from the dark, hollow spaces of the ravine where the lead cars had fallen. Clang, clang, scrape. It sounded like claws on a chalkboard, but with the weight of a sledgehammer. And then, the screaming started. It didn't come from our car. It came from the ventilation ducts. A long, agonizing wail that was cut short by the sound of wet, tearing fabric. The hope in Cale's eyes died instantly. The heating, Arthur whispered, pointing to the floor. The vents are open. I looked down. The metal grates were vibrating. Something was moving through the belly of the train, through the very pipes meant to keep us alive. The Aurora Express wasn't a fortress anymore. It was a buffet. We need to block the vents, I commanded, my survival instincts finally overriding the shock. Everything, blankets, luggage, coats. Now, as we scrambled to plug the openings, the temperature began to plummet. I could feel the heat escaping, the life bleeding out of the room. But as I shoved a heavy leather suitcase over the main intake, I saw something through the gaps in the floorboards. Pair of eyes. They weren't human. They were pale, milky orbs that reflected no light, staring up from the darkness of the subflooring. They weren't looking for a way out. They were waiting for us to fall asleep. The psychological weight of the cold is one thing, but the weight of being watched is another. We sat in a circle in the center of the tilted cabin, huddled under a mountain of wool blankets, our 4 flashlights flickering as the batteries began to fail. "Why isn't the emergency beacon active?" Mara asked, her teeth chattering. "The antenna was on the lead car," I replied. "It's probably at the bottom of the ravine, crushed under 10 tons of ice. No one knows we're here. No one is coming. So we just wait here to freeze?" Cale sobbed. "No," Arthur said, his voice low and gravelly. "We wait for whatever is in the pipes to get hungry enough to come through the luggage." Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. Time loses its meaning when you are counting your own breaths. Every time one of us would nod off, a new sound would jerk us awake. A thud against the ceiling, a scratching at the glass. The ice outside was shifting, the train groaning as it settled further into the ravine. Then the first retention loop snapped. The emergency lights, the dim red glow that had been our only comfort, flickered once, twice, and died. Absolute darkness swallowed us. "Julian." Mara's voice was a frantic whisper. "I'm here. Stay still." I reached for my flashlight, but before my fingers could find the switch, a cold draft hit the back of my neck. Not the cold of the tundra. A wet, stinking cold. The smell of old copper and rotted meat. I clicked the light on. The vent I had blocked with the suitcase was empty. The suitcase had been pulled downward. Cale was gone. There was no blood, no struggle, just a perfectly circular hole in the floor where the vent had been. We shone our lights into the opening, the beams disappearing into a maze of frost-covered wires and pipes. "Cale!" I yelled, though I knew it was useless. From deep within the bowels of the train, a mile away it seemed, we heard a laugh. It wasn't a human laugh. It was a mimicry, a high-pitched, warbling sound that used Cale's voice to cry out, "Help me! It's so cold!" Then the sound of bones snapping like dry kindling. Arthur stood up, his face set in a mask of grim determination. He picked up a fire axe from the wall emergency kit. "It's not just the cold hunting us," he said. "The storm didn't cause the derailment. Something was on the tracks. Something that's been waiting for a fresh delivery." We realized then that the Aurora Express wasn't trapped by accident. We were in a larder, and the frozen train was nothing more than a giant, steel ribcage, keeping the meat fresh for the things that lived in the white. "We have to move," I said, grabbing Mara's hand. "If we stay here, we're just sitting ducks. The engine's auxiliary core is 3 cars back. If I can jumpstart the thermal discharge, we can fry anything in the vents." "And if you can't?" Mara asked. I looked at the black hole in the floor, where the thing was still imitating Cale's dying whimpers. "Then we make sure we're not alive when they start eating." The darkness in Car 07 was no longer just an absence of light. It was a physical weight. Every breath we took felt like swallowing needles, the air so cold it crystallized in our lungs. We couldn't stay in the sleeper car. The hole in the floor, the place where Cale had been dragged into the metal bowels of the train, was an open invitation for whatever was hunting us. "We move now," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Arthur, you take the lead with the axe. Mara, stay between us. If you see movement in the vents, don't scream. Just run." Arthur nodded, his knuckles white around the handle of the fire axe. He kicked the warped door of the car. It groaned, the metal screeching against the ice outside, but it didn't budge. "The ice has shifted," Arthur grunted, his breath thick like fog. "We're pinned." "The emergency bypass," I remembered. "There's a manual crank under the floor mat. It bypasses the hydraulic locks." I knelt, my frozen fingers fumbling with the heavy rubber mat. When I pulled it back, I froze. The metal floor plating wasn't just cold, it was wet. A thick, translucent slime coated the latch. It smelled of sulfur and old, stagnant water. Something had already been here. Something had used this hatch to enter our car, and it had left a trail. "Julian, hurry," Mara urged, her eyes darting to the overhead luggage racks. I ignored the revulsion, grabbed the lever, and cranked. With a violent thunk, the door to the connecting corridor hissed open. We didn't wait. We tumbled into the vestibule, the space between Car 07 and Car 08. The scene that met us was a nightmare in stasis. The accordion-style walls of the vestibule had been shredded. Massive claw marks 3 inches deep were gouged into the steel. But it wasn't the damage that stopped my heart. It was the silence. Car 08 had been the dining car. Usually, it was filled with the scent of coffee and the low hum of conversation. Now it was a graveyard of glass. The windows had shattered inward, and the Siberian snow had drifted in, covering the tables and chairs in a pristine white shroud. "Look," Mara whispered, pointing her light. Frozen in the center of the car were the passengers. They weren't dead, at least not yet. They were encased in translucent, amber-colored resin, pinned to the walls and the ceiling like insects in a collection. Their eyes were open, pupils dilated in terror, their bodies preserved by the freezing temperatures and whatever chemical the things had used to bind them. "They're keeping them," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. "They're storing them like winter grain." Suddenly, a soft, wet sound echoed from the far end of the car. Schlick, schlick, schlick. A shape detached itself from the ceiling. It was long, spindly, and pale, the color of a drowned corpse. It didn't have a face, just a vertical slit that pulsed with a faint, bioluminescent blue light. It moved with a sickening, fluid grace, its limbs ending in serrated bone hooks. It was a weaver. That's what my mind called it. "Don't move," I breathed. The creature paused. Its head tilted, the slit opening to reveal rows of needle-thin teeth. It wasn't using sight. It was listening to our heartbeats. Mara's hand tightened on my arm. Her pulse was racing, a frantic drumming that the weaver could clearly hear. The creature's blue light intensified. It let out a sound, a perfect, chilling imitation of a child's laughter. "Please, it's so cold." It mimicked, using a voice it must have stolen from a passenger in Car 09. "Go!" Arthur roared, swinging the fire axe. The blade buried itself in the creature's side, spraying a thick, black ichor that hissed as it hit the snow. The weaver shrieked, a sound that shattered the remaining glassware in the car. Arthur didn't stop. He hacked at the thing, giving Mara and me a chance to scramble over the overturned tables. "Arthur, come on," I yelled. "Keep going to the engine," he shouted back, his face splattered with the black bile. "If you don't start the thermal discharge, none of us make it out of these cocoons." We ran. We didn't look back as the sounds of the struggle faded into the howling wind. We burst through the door into Car 09, the luxury sleeper. Here the carnage was worse. The walls were painted with frozen blood, and the air was thick with the scent of copper. We reached the end of the car, the heavy pressurized door leading to the engine room. This was my domain. As an engineer, I knew every bolt of this train. I slammed my ID card into the reader. "Access denied. System critical." "No, no, no." I hammered on the console. The crash must have severed the data link. I have to manually override the pneumatic seals. "Julian, behind us!" Mara screamed. I turned. At the other end of the long, dark hallway of Car 09, the shadows were moving. Not one, but 3 of the pale shapes were crawling along the walls, their hooks clicking against the metal. They were faster than the one in the dining car. I grabbed a flare from my emergency kit, struck it, and threw it. The brilliant red light flooded the hallway, momentarily blinding the creatures. They hissed, recoiling from the heat. "In here!" I pulled Mara into a narrow maintenance crawl space beneath the floorboards. We lay flat on our stomachs, the cold metal biting into our chests. Above us, we could hear the clack-clack-clack of the bone hooks on the floor. The weavers were pacing right over our heads. I could see their pale, spindly feet through the gaps in the floor grates. They were communicating. They made clicking sounds, a complex language of hunters. And then one of them stopped. It leaned down, its faceless head pressing against the grate. The blue light from its maw bled through the floor, illuminating Mara's terrified face. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. The creature began to mimic, but it didn't use a child's voice this time. "Julian, help me." It was Arthur's voice. "The axe broke, Julian. They're taking me to the ravine." The weaver was using the memories of its prey to lure us out. It was a psychological siege. It knew we were there. It was just playing with its food, waiting for the cold to break our will. "I have to get to the engine," I whispered into Mara's ear. "There's an emergency release for the floor panels 3 meters ahead. When I open it, I need you to climb up and distract them. I'll loop around to the engine door." "Distract them? Julian, they'll kill me." "They won't," I said, my voice cold with a realization I hadn't wanted to admit. "They don't want us dead yet. They want us fresh. They'll try to web you. That gives me 30 seconds. You're using me as bait?" She looked at me with horror. "I'm saving the 300 people still alive in those cocoons," I replied. "It's the only way." I didn't wait for her consent. I crawled forward, my heart a lead weight in my chest. I reached the release, pulled it, and the floor panel popped up. "Now!" I shoved her upward. Mara screamed as she was thrust into the hallway. The weavers converged on her instantly. I didn't look, couldn't. I scrambled through the subflooring, following the heavy power conduits toward the engine room. I reached the engine's under-access hatch. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, I heaved it open and rolled into the warm, vibrating heart of the Aurora Express. The smell of ozone and hot oil was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. I ran to the main console. The screens were flickering red. Reactor core, stable. Thermal discharge, offline. I began inputting the override codes. My hands were shaking so violently I missed the keys twice. "Come on, come on." Outside the engine room door, I heard Mara scream again, but it was cut short. Then silence. The screen turned green. Thermal discharge. Ready. Warning. External venting will incinerate all biological matter within 5 meters of the hull. I gripped the activation lever. This would save the train. It would melt the ice, kill the weavers, and send a heat signature so bright the satellites would see us from space. But it would also seal the fate of anyone caught outside the reinforced engine room. I was about to pull it when the door to the engine room hissed open. I spun around, expecting a weaver. Instead, it was Mara. She was standing in the doorway, her clothes torn, her skin unnaturally pale. She wasn't moving. She just stood there, staring at me with wide, hollow eyes. "Julian," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Mara? How did you? I thought they had you." She stepped into the light. Behind her, standing in the shadows of the corridor, were 3 weavers. They weren't attacking her. They were standing behind her, their hooks resting gently on her shoulders, like a twisted honor guard. "They didn't want to eat me, Julian," she said, a strange, terrifying smile spreading across her lips. "They wanted me to tell you the truth." "What truth?" I backed away, my hand still on the lever. "They didn't derail the train," she whispered. "We did. The Aurora Express wasn't a passenger line. Look at the manifest, Julian. Look at the cargo in Car 10. I glanced at the secondary monitor. My blood turned to ice. Car 10 wasn't a sleeper. It was a pressurized biological containment unit. The cargo wasn't luggage. It was labeled Specimen 0, the Hive Matriarch. "The crash was a jailbreak," Mara said, her voice beginning to warble, beginning to sound like the clicking of the weavers. "And we're not the survivors. We're the delivery service. This is part 3, the final expansion of the frozen train." The air in the engine room was warm, but I had never felt colder. Mara's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Behind her, the weavers, those spindly, pale horrors, stood like statues, their blue bioluminescence pulsing in sync with her steady, rhythmic blinking. Delivery service? I repeated, my hand trembling on the thermal discharge lever. Mara, what are you talking about? This is a passenger train. I saw the manifests. I saw the families boarding in Vladivostok. Cover stories, Julian, she said, her voice now carrying an unsettling, vibrating undertone. The passengers were the insulation. The families were the camouflage. Do you really think a private corporation would build a multi-billion-dollar, self-sustaining train just to move tourists across a frozen wasteland? No, they built a mobile laboratory, a way to transport her without attracting the attention of the satellites. She stepped closer. The weavers stepped with her, their bone hooks clicking on the diamond plate floor. The crash wasn't an accident, Mara continued. The matriarch in car 10, she didn't like the vibrations of the rails. She reached out. She called to her children in the permafrost. These things aren't aliens, Julian. They've been here under the ice since before the first fire was lit by man. We just woke them up. I looked at the monitor. Car 10 was deep in the ravine, buried under tons of wreckage. If the matriarch was down there, she was the heart of this web. And you? I asked, looking at the strange, glassy sheen in Mara's eyes. What are you now? A bridge, she whispered. They need someone who understands the machine, someone to turn off the safeties. The matriarch is cold, Julian. She's been under the ice for 10,000 years, and she wants the heat. She wants the reactor. I won't let you, I said, my voice hardening. I'll blow the core first. Mara's head tilted at an impossible angle, the same way the weaver had in the dining car. You think you're the hero? Look at your hands, Julian. I looked down. My fingernails were turning a bruised, translucent blue. My skin felt tight, itchy. I pulled back my sleeve and gasped. A thin, amber-colored vein was tracing its way up my forearm, pulsing with a faint light. The air in car 07, she said. The broken steam pipe you heard when you woke up? That wasn't steam. It was the spores. You've been breathing her in since the moment of the crash. We all have. We aren't being hunted, Julian. We're being digested from the inside out to make room for something better. The psychological weight hit me harder than the cold ever could. Every breath I took was fueling my own replacement. I wasn't fighting for survival. I was fighting a losing battle against my own biology. The thermal discharge, I gasped, my lungs feeling like they were filling with wet sand. It will kill the spores. It will kill the weavers. It will kill the survivors, Mara countered. Arthur is still alive in the dining car, Julian. So are the others in the cocoons. If you pull that lever, you aren't a savior. You're an executioner. The retention loop of my morality was fraying. I looked at the lever, then at Mara, then at the monitor showing the 300 souls trapped in the amber resin. If I did nothing, they became food. If I pulled it, I burned them alive. Clang, clang, clang. The sound returned. Something massive was hitting the engine room door from the outside. Not a weaver. Something much, much larger. The floor buckled. The heavy steel door began to bow inward, the rivets popping like champagne corks. She's here, Mara whispered, her voice full of awe. The matriarch has come for her heart. A massive, pale limb, thick as a tree trunk and covered in thousands of shivering cilia, smashed through the door. The smell of the ravine, of ancient rot and frozen earth, flooded the room. I saw a glimpse of a face, a colossal, pale moon of a head with 1,000 unblinking eyes. I didn't think. I couldn't afford to. I didn't pull the thermal discharge lever. Instead, I punched in the sequence for the reactor overload. If we're the delivery service, I growled, my voice now a distorted rasp, then the package is about to explode. Mara screamed, a sound that was half human, half insect. The weavers lunged. I felt a bone hook tear through my shoulder, but the adrenaline and the spores masked the pain. I threw my entire weight against the final confirmation key. Core meltdown imminent. 30 seconds. The matriarch's limb wrapped around my waist, lifting me off the floor. I was pulled toward that horrific, multi-eyed face. I could feel the heat of the reactor rising behind me, the air beginning to shimmer. You destroyed everything, Mara hissed, her jaw unhinging. No, I whispered, staring into the abyss of the matriarch's eyes. I just turned up the heat. The explosion didn't happen. As the timer hit 0, the lights didn't flash red. The reactor didn't scream. Instead, the entire train fell silent. The vibration of the engine died. The warmth vanished. I looked at the screen. System override. Remote access granted. A new voice came over the train's intercom. It wasn't Mara's. It wasn't the creature's. It was a crisp corporate voice from 1,000 miles away. Thank you, Julian, the voice said. The biothermal data from the meltdown attempt has provided the final baseline we needed. The spores react perfectly to extreme stress. The transformation is now 100% accelerated. I looked at my hands. They weren't blue anymore. They were white. My skin was hardening into a translucent shell. I looked at the matriarch. She wasn't eating me. She was cradling me. The crash wasn't a jailbreak, the voice continued. And the train wasn't a laboratory. The train was the incubator. We needed a controlled environment to see how the human mind integrates with the hive under terminal conditions. You did well. I realized then the ultimate horror. There were no survivors to save. There were no monsters to kill. We were all just data points. Arthur, Kale, Mara, and me, we were the prototypes for a new kind of soldier, a worker that could survive the coming ecological collapse. Mara wasn't my enemy. She was my shift lead. She reached out a hand, and this time, I took it. My fingers clicked against hers, bone on bone. Welcome to the company, Julian, she whispered. Outside, the Siberian wind continued to howl, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. I didn't feel anything at all. The Aurora Express sat silent in the ice, a steel tomb that had become a cradle for the new masters of the Earth. If you love this story and want more contents like this, comment, like, and subscribe to the channel. Also, check out the channel for interesting videos.